I think what really fuels the recent success of a movie like A Complete Unknown about Bob Dylan, or previously with the Johnny Cash biopic, Walk the Line, is going beyond documentary and presenting a first-person view of their own experience, seeing their story as their own, developing empathy by witnessing the struggles, the heartaches, and the little victories early on that kept them going. And I mean, it's cool seeing all the bullshit Bob and Johnny had to put up with, but what the world really needs is a Dolly Parton biopic. I mean, now there is someone who has seen some bullshit, right? I can't imagine. The stories of what she had to put up with, endure, fight through, would have made Johnny wear an even darker shade of black. Our guest today is Brandi Sidoryk, one half of the country band Nice Horse, an effortlessly optimistic and encouraging talent who has also seen some bullshit. And if I can boldly draw a line between Brandi and Dolly, neither has let it define them or their careers. These kinds of stories become great movie arcs because they inevitably capture one of our collective favorite themes of overcoming adversity and knowing there is more to us than the events we lived through. Brandi Sidoryk is a multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, bassist, guitarist, French horn-ist, a musician in the Royal Canadian Navy, and founding member of Alberta country band Nice Horse, a band who has garnered steady praise and awards for their music and creative efforts, both locally and nationally with the Canadian Country Music Association over the span of multiple albums and singles in the past 10 years. My name is Glenn Erickson. This is Almost Famous Enough. Thanks for spending your time with us. This is Brandi Sidoryk. So, well, I mean, Brandi, the first thing I was honestly gonna be like, I was gonna set the table with a bunch of stuff maybe, and then I was like, but before we do that, I need to make sure the guy you're living with isn't around because he's a total scallywag or whatever term I was gonna use.
Yeah, he can be a real distraction. So I told him he is around. He's downstairs right now, but he said he promised me not.
So I'm gonna be always a little scared. Okay.
Yeah, just. You never know when he might appear.
Okay. Full transparency, because nobody loves an inside joke on a podcast. Brandi is partnered up with my former bandmate, Rob Angus, who's both an incredible, wonderful, warm-hearted, and absolute jokester of a wild boy sometimes. So I love every part of him.
He is all those things.
Lucky you. Better you than me, all that stuff.
Well, look, you were being in a band with him. You've been partnered with him for technically longer than I have, so you know better than me. But he did ask me before going on the podcast with you today. He said, "How are you and Glenn going to find enough stuff to talk about me for 2 whole hours?" I said, "I don't think we're talking just about you."
I wouldn't expect him to frame that any other way completely, honestly. I just love that when I reached out to ask you, it was not even 2 full minutes before I got a text in all caps about me asking you and not him. So, but we've already spent way too much time talking about him for his ego, so we should move on.
He got his 5 minutes. He's no more of this podcast.
That's all he gets. Well, Brandi of Nice Horse, I am talking to now what mathematically is one half of Nice Horse, right?
Yes.
So you've been sitting with that now for a year. Nice Horse. I mean, this is 2025, so I think this is the 10th year since you formed as a band. And I don't know if you guys consider the Hawaii story the official forming, or if when you started actually making songs, every band maybe considers it differently. When do you consider when Nice Horse actually formed?
Yeah, I think it is that Hawaii trip. So in July of 2015, and to be honest, that is actually when we started writing songs as well together as a group, because I had sort of, as you know, I was in a project called Sydney York prior to Nice Horse, and we had had gone through the gamut of our career, and in all the ups and the downs and the trials and the tribulations. And at that time, Sydney York, who was my bandmate Krista Woodlet and myself, we had sort of taken a bit of a break from Sydney York. We just needed to step back. We had been doing a lot of touring, and we just wanted to reassess. And for me, that meant kind of getting back to what was the most important to me in music in the first place, which is songwriting. So I had in 2015 had done a series of month-long songwriting trips where I just rented my own house out on Airbnb and went somewhere else in the world to just feel inspired, feel creative, and write. And so I spent a month in Paris that year, coincidentally at the same time as the Paris attacks, which was quite the time to be in Paris. And I spent a month in Hawaii. And when I spent that month in Hawaii, I invited some of my favorite collaborators to join me, which were Krista, that at the time was, also on a break from Sydney York. She had been my bandmate and co-writer for years, and Katie Rocks, who was a friend in the music community for years. She was doing a solo project, and I loved her writing, and Kaylee Bird, who is also a solo artist, who I had toured with for in the years prior as Sydney York. And so the four of us went to Hawaii, and I just invited them because I'm like, come write songs and have some Mai Tais on the beach with me and just, be friends. And what happened was
what happened was a country band.
Yes, exactly. And it was not intended.
So now that I know that part of the story, which I had never known before, how different would your life look if something instead happened in France? What kind of band would you be in now if it was a French origins, a Parisian
French electropop band?
Who knows? French horn, you could have. That's a bit of a stretch. That's a bit of a stretch. Not a stretch.
I've already
because
played
that's
French
what
horn
you
in a pop band.
You have already played French horn. Okay, we're already digressing, but I looked it up.
Yeah.
Did you? What are the most famous songs you know with French that feature French horn? And everybody knows Brandi plays French horn.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a lot of great horn parts in Brahms symphonies. I would also say there's a lot of good Wagner horn parts, but probably the thing that is most popular, is probably Peter and the Wolf. People know because hear the instrumentation, and they actually then can. But what about all the Robin Hood soundtrack? Like John Williams, tons of soundtrack stuff uses French horn.
Okay, I love that you actually went right to actual orchestral music because you're also trained. So you have this entire library. I have none of that library immediately anywhere near my frontal lobes. So I immediately was just going to pop songs, like
pop music,
songs, and they're all very old. But
is it like Beatles?
The most
stuff?
famous Beatles used it. Yeah. So there's clearly stuff written about McCartney being the first to try to slide in some orchestral arrangements in some of their music, which wasn't necessarily favorable with some of the others. But yeah, definitely some of the Beatles songs that are in there, and Sgt. Pepper's is ones they often throw to. I was interested to find out that they were saying they think the Stones, You Can't Always Get What You Want, which is my favorite Stones song, features horns and French horn prominently. And they say Neil Young's After the Gold Rush, which now I'm going to have to go back and listen to also.
Well, I will too. And you're speaking of not having some of that classical orchestral music at the front of your mind when we're talking about this, but you will notice I also have some really interesting, unique gaps in my music repertoire because I spent a lot of my formative years engulfed in orchestral or classical music, on opera and country. Those are the genres that I really know. And so I have some really interesting gaps that I'm sometimes embarrassed to admit, particularly in classic rock. I have some really big gaps there that every other human in the world knows except for me, it seems like.
Well, seems to know. I think it's the way we always project on ourselves, though, right? Like we go into a place and we think we should know this because of the room we're in or whatever it is. But everybody has their gaps, and then everybody fakes it, and then they wait for that one moment they can throw out that one relevant tidbit that they know in a room, right? But I don't know.
I suppose that's true. And that's funny point that you say that too, because I feel like especially in the last 5 years of my music career, I've really tried to make a point of being so honest about what my gaps are, not just to myself, but like within the industry and publicly too, because I feel like that's sometimes an easy trap to fall into in the music industry. Is
I think it's the first trap, if I'm being completely honest, is that you're so desperate for opportunities and chance and the validation that goes with it, but especially opportunities, that you will try to fit into any costume that you need to in any room, metaphorically, right, to create opportunities, and you get sucked into that. I have to be able to talk about everything and know everything and be really good at everything. All of that is that initial trap, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like that, it's almost like that innate like desire to be respected within the industry as soon as you enter it, and I know there's a lot of fear surrounding that, and I think it comes from both sides, artist and industry. Like so often, I think because I also love asking industry professionals for advice and other artists for advice, because I feel like it's information gathering, and I like to hear what people have to say. But rarely does somebody ever say to me, and I didn't notice this until later, that if like when I ask them a question, would they say, I don't know? Which I honestly think there's a lot of questions most of us don't know the answer to in music. Like it's an ever-changing landscape and there's no formula. And so it's funny that rarely do you hear, I don't know. I think people are scared to say that, but I think that's a point of strength as opposed to a point of weakness.
Yeah, I do too. I think you will instead hear, that's a really good question, which is really just code for I don't know, but I'm stalling.
Yeah.
But
stalling.
It's also how they coach people to actually talk in interviews about, that's a really good question, and to like puff up your interviewer. But so I've completely abandoned your timeline before I even got into your timeline. But I have, but what you were talking about just makes me think of another interesting question in the industry though. And that's like, do you think, in your observation, that whole willingness to sort of shed what you don't know and sort of that authenticity part, you were talking about wanting the approval in the industry. And I've always I think we all do, but I'm going to be honest about it here, is I've always had this judgment over all my years that perhaps sometimes the people who look like they're going for the approval of the industry aren't feeling confident in gaining approval with fans and audience, or as successful. And even vice versa. Like I see these people who just immediately, like, we get jealous of them, right? They just pick up a guitar and then someone says, you should come play. And then everybody loves what they do right off the bat. Yeah. And then they don't give a shit about the whole, like, no, you got to do it this way, and you're supposed to know these people, and you get all, but they don't care about all that kind of stuff. It feels like always two different people. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And I don't even know if that's accurate. So just because you're really smart, I thought I'd ask whether you think what you think of that observation. I'm really smart,
but
I know you're smart. I want to know what you think.
I do think it's really interesting, because I think it almost boils down to, personality types. And I think you're right. There are those artists that don't appear to care what anybody else thinks and pick up a guitar and write from the heart and can produce something amazing, and it's why they become respected. But then there are the others, and I think I can put myself into this category a bit, is like, I always say I'm not a capital A artist. I'm a type A artist. And the capital A artist to me is the one who doesn't care, the business side of things is often secondary. They'll sit in a room for 12 hours and play. And that to me is always capital A artist. And I am a type A person. I have had to, like, I'm a creative, but I'm also type A. And I've really had to manage that, how that looks and how it presents itself in my career, in my music career, and how I balance the two. And I've noticed that for me, I can't help but care. Like, that's just going to be me, and I have to accept that. It is part of me, though, and I think that that's a relatable part of me and something that deserves to be shared from an artist perspective as much as the not caring seems to be deserves its due in this artist realm. And I think they're different, and I think both actually have some landmines that can trip you up a little bit when you're navigating not just music, but a music career.
Yeah, I think they have merit and landmines. You're right. Maybe that's with everything. I was being a little harsh and very like black and white with that sort of judgment statement, but it's also, full transparency, probably a little bit of projecting on my part, because I think that's where I fit in too, which is like, I don't know that I ever felt fully confident, as you called it, as capital A artist either. But I knew I was really good at all these other things that seemed really important. Yeah. And, you know, and it didn't take long till I learned that perseverance was perhaps a greater characteristic than talent when it came to a career in music even. So there's all kinds of people on both sides and along the way for sure. So let's jump back, because I want to keep talking about, I'm really interested. Like, you've been sitting for a year now, almost 10 years as a group, Nice Horse, since you sort of, in a way, went back to your roots. I know personally that's for you, like the way you said, like you spent time doing a lot of different things, classically trained. You try this alt pop group and go for a real hard run at it, and then kind of go back in this moment with friends in Hawaii to discovering kind of roots and probably just that connection you had with one another that really made it come out purely, and decide to go after that. And then 10 years later, it's just down to the two of you OGs, and you've been sitting on that for a year. You have an album that was out, last year, partway through, that you've been sitting on. And so kind of looking back, 10-year span, what do you feel? I'm going to ask you a big question right off the bat, and then we can start like dicing things up. But what do you feel, because you've had a bunch of, I'm going to call it probably the rug pulled out from under you moments, or a handful of them. Like, you've had band member changes a couple of times. You had a band member change with one of that original four. I'm not going to jump into it. My outside perception is that was a difficult one and challenging for you guys relationally. And then the most recent one, I mean, Krista's been with you forever, right? You guys were really tight. Those kinds of changes are hard. So, but I don't want to assume anything. So in a 10-year span, what are the things, or the thing that was the most surprising in your career that you ran into?
Yeah, the most surprising thing. I think that's, you're right. Like, we have had a lot of moments where I've kind of, like thrown my hands up in the air and been like, what next? Like, what could possibly happen next? And a lot of difficult moments. But I would say, like, as difficult as the band member change-ups are, because they obviously are, being in a band is hard. And like, it's equivalent to breaking up with a person. Like, Krista and I joke about this all the time, like, that we've probably have more financial endeavors together, like more shared bank accounts than I have had with any partner in my life. Like, that's like, and to be honest, with all of the touring we did, often in Sydney work with like 5 people to a hotel room, I've probably shared a bed with Krista more than I have shared with some of my partners. Like that's just the honest truth. And so those things are always really, really hard, because it's hard to, this isn't a business where you go Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and you see these people and then you have this separation from them. There's the lines of separation are often blurred, and we're all friends when we started. So they were even more blurred. All of those band change-ups were very hard, but also very understandable, because keeping people together for long periods of time is hard, and the industry is hard, and there's not a lot of, it's hard to be sustainable. And so the financial stress of it, paired with, with the creative side, like having all of those creatives contributing, that it makes it very, and also motivations. Everybody does this. Keeping 4 people motivated on the same track with the same values over like the course of your life as you're changing and growing is not always realistic.
It's not possible. It's not possible.
Yeah,
and you just hope that you can ride it out together, because you're always going to be on a different wave. Yeah,
absolutely. And I know that I can think of one of those band member change-ups being like really just, I think, a difference in what we expected, what we wanted out of being in a band. And there are so many different ways a band can look, and none of them are wrong. Like, none of them are wrong. You can be gunning to be playing stadiums, or you can be playing in a garage band like once a month, and neither of those things is wrong. And because there are so many different places on the spectrum you can land, it might not work. Not everyone might have the same shared vision, and someone's vision might change over the course of time. And that's really how it felt. It doesn't make it any easier. But that is truly what happens. And with I can definitely speak to Krista leaving Nice Horse just over a year ago. For me, that was so hard. Krista is my best friend and remains so, but it's hard. It was hard because her and I have been creatively linked for 15 years. Yeah. And so being that creatively linked, and it's more the idea of like, are we still going to find ways to make music together? Like, that was something that was kind of my first question. But I also know being in a band is hard, and I know that it wasn't right for her anymore. And I had to respect that, because I also want the best for her, just like she wants the best for me. So I mean, as these things are hard, and I'll be honest too, we did therapy as a band for years.
That's cool.
That's
so great,
because
it's so
it was important.
Yeah. Well, it's so like a relationship, like everything you've been saying, right? Sounds like things. Yeah. We could just be talking right now about relationships, not music business. And but that's what happens when you get into a band, 100%. And I think everybody who's done it obviously knows just how intensely, down to all of the inside jokes and metaphors, it's how true it is. So the fact that you did therapy, I think it's actually really incredible and incredibly mature way to put a stake, or to not put a stake, that sounded like the wrong version of the word, to invest in the level of stakes that you have in the success or the career that you want, right? To like take it that seriously. I think that's pretty incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult then that was, moving on from that and not having that around. I mean, we were joking at the start about the guy in the basement, my bandmate, and I know.
Sounds like I'm keeping him in the basement, by the way, when you say that.
I like it. That's I want to keep that picture for a while, so I'm going to keep referencing it that way.
Okay.
I floundered for 5 years when that band ended, because I didn't want to play with anybody else. I didn't want to offer my version and my vision of anything to anybody else's songs than those two guys' songs. So it's really hard to get over. So creatively, not just personally, the way you're expressing your relationship with Krista and with the others, but even creatively when you've got that much invested. So that totally makes sense. So Brandi, the thing that I was most surprised of when I like crack open the laptop to do some research on the things that I don't know about you, because I've had the good fortune of knowing you for quite a while. I think we met in New York City. Was it in New York City at your,
I don't think
at
it was
one of your shows? Were you not at CMJ?
No, it wasn't CMJ, but we maybe met. I was actually trying to think about when we met too, because
It wasn't South by, was it? We were in some other American city at a festival.
I bet you it was Austin. Because Sydney York played a number of times at South by. So I bet you that was what it was.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then obviously you coming through, and then the band change, and you guys being in the Project Watt thing and all of these things ever since. Had the good fortune to know you and to watch the career of the band. It's not hard because you guys are so incredibly active on social media, so it's very easy to keep up with you at the very least. But the thing I was so surprised at was that your self-titled record last year was technically only your second album over this entire span, right? Like you guys came out, like, so you decide in Hawaii, I need a break, I'm going to go do these inspirational things. 4 friends get together, you find a spark, you decide to go with it. Like, you came back with whatever spark you had, the 4 of you, like, immediately was visible to everyone around you because the industry jumped on it quite quickly. Like, you had support, you were touring for, like, or opening for acts that other people who had been around longer probably were wanting those spots. And you're putting out music. You put out an EP and then a full length within 18 months of that period, right? And so you were on that very fast trajectory. And I was just so surprised that this was this full length thing. So
I know.
Tell me a little bit about that journey. That's a different journey. I mean, I have assumptions, I don't want to make them, so I'm just curious about how you see what that journey was between that quick start and the whole idea of an album to that gap, which may not feel like a gap to you.
Oh, it feels like a gap, I can tell you. It felt like a painful, excruciating gap. So, and actually you asking what the hardest thing has been in the last, like, in this 10 years of Nice Horse, I would say this is it. For me, well, there were 2 reasons, I think, 2 major reasons that we didn't release a second record until last year, second full-length record until last year. One of them was the pandemic. We were very much, the pandemic was not good for anybody, but in terms of the timeline of Nice Horse's career, it came at a pretty catastrophic time for us. We had just released our first single to radio and it went top 40 and we couldn't do a thing about it. We even started the pandemic in a stressful place because we were in Switzerland when it was announced that borders were starting to close. We were on Switzerland and playing shows and we struggled to get back. And Nice Horse has been like a long distance band spread across the country. We've never all lived in the same city. So when we got back to Canada, and I remember landing in Pearson and us being like, okay, everybody, we'll see you in a couple of weeks when this all blows over. and one of us went to their home in London, Ontario, and one went to their home in Vancouver, and 2 of us went to our homes in Alberta, and that was that couple of what we thought was going to be a couple of weeks was absolutely not a couple of weeks, and so it just came. We had a single that did well at radio that we couldn't tour. We couldn't capitalize on at all. And it really, we were on such a good trajectory and it just really kind of took the wind out of our sails. But that I can't truly blame it all on the pandemic. However, I think that's a part of it that did really stunt us. But the other thing is, and this one is the hardest. Even to talk about it, it's hard. But we, from the very beginning of Nice Horse, and you're right, we were given some opportunities that we were so grateful for so early in our career. We were all musicians in different projects before, and none of those opportunities were lost on us. We knew how important they were and how lucky we were to have them so early on in the career of Nice Horse. But we also were continually being saddled with the perception that Nice Horse was a gimmick because we were all women. It was said to us so many times, too many to count, which was so frustrating and so confusing to us because we were all friends and it was to be honest, one of the most organic starts of a project I'd ever had. And I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that just because we were women, we were being perceived as a gimmick. It was so frustrating and also, to be honest, pretty motivating. Like we knew because we were getting that feedback so much that we're like, okay, let's look at other bands, let's look at our peers in the industry and what they're doing, and let's just aim to be 3 times better than all of them, because that's just what we kind of had to, that's where our brains had to go. We're like, we can't be as good, we have to be better, and we have to aim for that. So that was,
can I ask, because, well,
yeah.
I mean, the last thing you said is the unfortunate thing that women have had to bear for a very long time in all kinds of industries, that they can't just be good, they have to be better or they'll be dismissed completely. But if I can just, I'd love to sort of just drill a little bit into where those voices were coming from that were considering you a gimmick. Like, how close to you were those voices, or were they Alberta industry voices? Were they when you were trying to get into the wider industry? Was it in country music, or was it wider than that? I'm wondering where those voices were coming from that interpreted that.
It was largely in country music. There are a few Alberta voices that had mentioned it, not people that had known us very well, mind you, but a lot from radio and from buyers, from festival buyers. There was a festival that we played fairly early on in our career, and I'll just never forget this. And it really feels like it. I think it, as much as this frustrated me and hurt me, I think about this all the time. And so I guess in a way I can thank this promoter, because I'm so mindful of this fact as a woman making my way through the industry and acting as hopefully a mentor for emerging artists. I remember we were playing this festival and our agent had warned us that they were a little on the fence about booking us in the first place, but they did eventually book us, and we played the show, and we played a really good show. And afterwards he came up to me backstage and said, "Wow, that was great." He said, "I've got to be honest, I was reluctant to book you because last time we had an all-female act, they weren't very good." And immediately,
that's all it took.
Yeah. And so I said to him, I was like, "Have you ever had an all-male band that wasn't very good?" And then after that, immediately stop hiring every other male band ever. Like that's to me, that's
who's ever used that phrase, all male band, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody in the history of music. It's never been done, other than
nobody.
Boy band. But then we're sort of derogatorily categorizing them a certain way too.
It's true, that in itself. But I remember saying, I knew in that moment that other women were in the industry were always going to be judged by what we did. And it's not fair, but it's the reality that we have to face right now. And that knowledge is powerful in itself. And And so that made me think every single time, like about, and I mean, look, everyone in Nice Horse has always been professional, respectful. They're like, every one of the women that has been in Nice Horse, I think of as like very professional and has always like, their deportment in the industry is always amazing. I'm very proud to have worked with such professional women. But we always, like, down to like, okay, everybody, let's make sure the green room is spotless, because we don't want to be the people, we don't want to be the women that made it harder for the next women coming behind us. So, and it might not be fair.
Because there's guys like that, because you're saying there's guys like that all over who would take any small issue or misperception from you and project it onto every other version that could come after you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's
a big thing to bear, Brandi. That's like a huge weight.
It is huge, but I think that it's also.
Did that come up in therapy? Because that's a Look, massive.
It's come up in my personal therapy. That's for sure.
It's just so unfair.
Yeah.
That you should have to take that on. Sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. That's like, you're right. It is unfair, but I also believe in I believe in the talent coming up. Of all genders, I want to be, regardless of men or women, I want to be a good role model, and I want to be professional, and I want to be a great musician, and I want to be able to do all of those things regardless of whether it seems to be my responsibility as a woman in the industry too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want all those things anyways. So I do accept that responsibility, because I think it is something that I should be right now. And I hope that, and I should say this too, of all of these things, like I'm saying how people thought we were a gimmick and we had like a lot of animosity, like, you know, or just like reluctance about an all-female band. That's not every single person in the industry that said that. And there were so many that were not like that. And I would never want those people who were such great supporters to feel like their contribution to helping lift us up is slighted in any way. And I hope that those people continue to make that positive change, because all of those things are helpful, but until we experience that cultural change, the broader cultural change, is when it is truly going to get better and more equitable for artists, no matter what.
I agree. I think, like, even I was having a conversation, if I can be frank, about the podcast, and with somebody who was asking me about my diversity choices, if you can believe, right? So, and there was a moment where I realized what they were asking me was, are you going to make sure you get the female opinion? But what they were really asking is, am I going to get the female opinion on the female issues in the industry, which is kind of what we're talking about now. But I realized that I felt so bothered by that unfair framing, because I just want the female opinion on the business, on the career. I don't need it on the female issues alone, despite that they get front and center and marquee, because there still isn't equity or equality across the board 100%. In fact, I had written down, Brandi, a question about, has the experience as the female artist changed though in your 10 years? I was curious. And then I wasn't sure if I wanted to say that for the reasons I just said. But you guys kind of famously had their little YouTube series about shit people say to Nice Horse and being labeled a girl group. But you talking about the word gimmick, and then me wondering about how things changed, it makes me think of like another Alberta country artist who you've worked with, Haley Benedict, who I've asked her on Instagram if she wants to come on, and she hasn't responded. So if you see her, you can give her a kick and say, I actually want to talk to her about her career. But
I'll poke her.
But I'm pretty sure, well, I know because I've sat down and talked to her, and I've seen it more and more, that she gets this gimmick response because she's trying to be really good at playing lead guitar, and gets put in a different version of a box than you guys did. But I'm wondering, like, have things not changed? Like, I think she's still getting like called out or criticized or put in a box, or misunderstood primarily.
Yeah, well, and I will say this, like, I think Hayley is very good at playing lead guitar. Like, I think she is.
Oh, so do I.
And
yeah,
she's continuing
100%.
to improve. Like, she is really good. But yeah, people will always say things like trying to be really good. Heaven forbid somebody show their progress as an artist in their formative years. Getting, like, to me, that's also the most important thing about Hayley is I think she showed a lot of her progress as a lead guitarist online, and that resonated with people. She has a following because of her honesty in her development as a guitar player and as an artist, and I think that's really amazing and something that should be celebrated about her instead of scorned. Which, like, I'm not saying people have scorned it, but people. I mean, especially in social media and the internet can be sort of harsh and unnecessarily.
Sort of,
absolutely. Yeah. But I also think an artist like Hayley, and I think that we found this too in our career, is that it did get easier. I can't tell though, because it's hard, because I can't change my perspective. I'm here in my body and in my air, like, in my sphere, and it's hard for me to see what's happening outside of that. I can only assume and gather information from other people, but I can't tell if it's easier because we worked to gain the respect, and us now personally have some respect and that within the industry that makes it easier for us. And I know Hayley is likely feeling the same, because she has been doing great things, and she is earning and has earned well-deserved respect in the industry. So it's hard to tell whether it is actually systemic change or if it's just change within our sphere.
That's a great word to use.
I'm grateful for
systemic. Both. Yeah. Well, this is what I love about you, Brandi, is this incredible optimism, and that you tell all of these stories with such a smile on your face, despite you getting, having to tell me a story about how you got the shit hand of the deck sometimes. I do think it's interesting that, I mean, look at it, like what Hayley's doing. Lindsay L already carved a path, a girl right out of Alberta, right? And so she is an incredible artist in her own right. She also put her playing out front. Nobody's comes out of the gate or is ever born great at the thing that they do right off the bat, and it's people who allow themselves to be seen as improving. I mean, the fact that Lindsay just finished a run of shows being the lead guitar on the Shania Twain tour, like any guitar player of any gender, of any era so far, needs that long to get that good to be the one chosen to play those shows, right? And
and we don't have these same conversations often. Yeah, and like I think there are.
You never do with men, but it's a fact. It's just a fact.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think Lindsay's another great example. Like, that woman, like, she chipped through bedrock to get through this industry. She has worked so hard, and I have a great deal of respect for. There's so many people that I can just say so proudly that I have so much respect for, that are my peers in this industry, and I love to see them making positive change. And it's funny that you say, Glenn, that I tell you these stories with a smile on my face. I honestly think the reason is because, like, I feel like I've been kicked quite a bit in this industry, and I don't like that. It's hard, it's crushing. But I love music. Like, when I've been thinking about that so much, particularly in the last year of my life and of my career. When I strip everything away, all of the things that, and you can relate to me on this, because you were just talking about how, yeah, you're a good musician, but you're like good at all of these other business things too that are important to the industry side of things, and indirectly really important to a music career. Like, I feel the same way sometimes. Like I'm a bit of a music industry multi-tool. Not, for lack of a better word, calling myself a tool. But when I strip it all away, what I love to do, not what I have to do, not what I need to do, not what I do to progress this forward and this forward. When I strip it all away, what I love to do is music, and I love to create. And that to me is what puts a smile on my face, because and it's probably the reason why, you know, we persevere through all of this stuff, is because when I really do strip it all away, it's the music, and I am always going to smile every day I get to make music.
Well, Brandi, I mean, that's incredible. And I mean, I think it's a little more than that. Anyone who's actually been in a room with you just knows that you're a vibe, and you're fantastic to be around. And I think you've just also been blessed with some incredible character. So, but I mean, it's funny. I have to call myself out, because I asked you, like, has anything changed in this industry? This is why it takes so fucking long to change, Brandi. Is I just caught myself, because I knew of Lindsay L when she was still a teenager, right? When she was just writing with Randy Bachman and because of that, I have this thing locked in where I just let the phrase escape, a girl from Alberta, and I have no business calling her a girl, right? This many years down the road. And that's what is so hard to change, right? Is it's the people that look like me who call the shots and make decisions. And I tried to I'm not tooting my horn. I tried to just call myself on it, and I just fully recognize how many don't. And that's why things don't change.
I think you're so right, Glenn. Like, I think that the important part is, like, creating lasting cultural change is really hard. We see it. It's like so in our faces every single day right now, especially how hard and how sometimes fleeting, even like how unfortunately fleeting things that we thought had changed can be unchanged in a heartbeat. And so I think but I also don't think it's realistic for us to assume that nobody will ever make a mistake again in terms of you know, saying something the way people used to say it. I think the biggest part is, if it's something that you maybe feel you shouldn't have said, or you should have said a different way, truly calling your own self out on it makes it okay. Like, you know, you're giving yourself the ability to change and grow. And sometimes that happens in front of people, but you have to be also willing to change and grow. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. So let's put the gimmicky thing to bed, because everybody has to know that what I was most fascinated about the four of you when you first started, and really all the way along, was like, you went and you got together in Hawaii, you formed a country band. Yeah, like, not all of you were country right away, or whatever reasons people, I don't know, would infuse this reason they think it's a gimmick, or you're just trying to play, you know, to whatever you think is trendy, or whatever they would infuse in it. What I saw firsthand was, I don't think you were a bass player before Nice Horse. And I know for a fact Krista was not a drummer before Nice Horse. So I absolutely dare anybody to put together a gimmick band and tell the people that they have to learn the instruments at a professional level that everybody's going to expect for you to even land one of those gigs. Like, if you, like, not everybody may know the name Tom Cochrane, right? But like a Canadian rock icon who had massive hits through the late 70s and the 80s into the 90s. And before Life is he had a long career before Life is a Highway. And now for him, Cars is a daily occurrence, probably, unfortunately. But so Tom Cochrane aside, a massive icon. Like, I've only played guitar, and I would still be scared shitless the first time I get thrown into an opening act with an icon, right? Like, let alone you didn't have the years behind learning that instrument that I had behind playing guitar at the same age. And so when I say put the gimmicky thing to bed, I cannot understand anybody not asking one contextual, critical question to understand how incredible you all are as musicians. And the dedication
Thanks,
you have to your musicianship is absolutely stunning. And by stunning, I'm literally trying to achieve hyperbole. I don't know, like, I know some savants who can just pick up every instrument and play them. I don't think you guys are savants. So it's, to me, that much more inspiring that you had to work your ass off to be so good. And I still see it. Like, you're playing your bass on Instagram all the time for people and learning new licks and stuff, which I think is super fun to let people in.
I will say this, Glenn. So I actually did play bass before Nice Horse.
Okay.
I actually was one of the few members of Nice Horse who did play my instrument before joining Nice Horse. I was in a math rock band called Beekeeper for a number of years. That was at the same time that I was in Sydney, New York. I was also in this math rock band, and I started playing bass 2 years after I started playing French horn when I was a kid. So I have played bass for a while, but it just wasn't my primary for a really long time, because I mean, I pursued my degrees in classical voice. It wasn't like always. I didn't spend hours sitting in the practice room practicing bass. I spent hours in the practice room practicing voice. So it definitely, my relationship with bass definitely shifted at the start of Nice Horse, but it was still an instrument I played. Krista, however, had not played drums before Nice Horse. She is an incredible classical bassoonist. She's an incredible musician. And when you say that maybe we're not savants, if there was one of us who was going to be, I would say it's Krista. I think she's one of the most incredible musicians I've ever met. And she did learn the drums for Nice Horse. And I think one of the biggest accomplishments, and something I'm so proud of, I'm proud of the entire band for this, but particularly of Krista. We, in 2022, we were all nominated for our instruments at the Canadian Country Music Awards, which is the first time a band had all been nominated in 30 years since Prairie Oyster. And and Krista was the first woman to ever be nominated in Drummer of the Year. I'm intensely proud of her. That's for incredible. That, and I'm proud of the. Yeah, and I think that it meant a lot to have us all be up there for that, and I think Krista deserves a great deal of props for that, because she had started playing that instrument 7 years prior. So it's pretty incredible, absolutely. But I will say this, and this is the other thing that made that. I mean, we kind of talked about it a bit earlier about how long it took us to release a second record. We battled, because what was really important to us as a band was that we were a band, and I might be a lead vocalist and Katie might be a lead vocalist, but our other band members, their voice is their instrument in the context of our recordings. And it took us a long time to release that record because we recorded it 2 times over.
Yeah.
So because we continually had people telling us not to play on our own record, and we had to fight tooth and nail, and we would play and people would take our parts off. And it was, and look, and here's the other thing is I don't fault any of these people that were like, you can't play on, we don't want you to play on your own record. They all wanted us to fit in that tiny little pinhole of country radio. And they were trying to do something, good for us. There wasn't ill intention. The problem
Well, let's
is
be
is
clear.
that-
Like this one isn't just subjective to sexism, right? Like this is an industry problem generally.
100%.
And it's been around forever. I remember
yes.
when I was younger, there was a band called Switchfoot. I don't know if you're familiar. They kind of grew out of the Christian rock into, and then they had that a couple of big radio rock hits. And some people I knew in the industry told me, so when they were a Christian rock top of that industry, they were playing on their own records, and then they went to record their mainstream label, and they sat there in the studio and watched other people play their parts. Right? Like this is and country music, when you say a pinhole, the country music industry, if I'm right, I think you would agree with me, might have the smallest pinhole of sound that they're choosing to put
I know.
out.
It is the truth. And you are so right. What I like, this issue that I'm talking about is definitely not it's not exclusive to women, but because we were women, and because of the barriers and the hurdles we were already facing, it was more important to us that we didn't. And so that, like, the way it affected us, and what we wanted to do and what we wanted to represent in music, because I mean, when it comes down to it, I would rather make music that meant something to me and the women that I'm creating music with, and have it mean something, and contribute to positive change, as opposed to getting a top 10 on country radio. To me, that's more meaningful, and it's what I would love to, if I like, and I mean, I say this very humbly because this is me being presumptuous about leaving a legacy in music. But if I was to leave a legacy in music, that's the one I would want to leave. So to me, that was how we all felt. And so but it took, we had to fight. We had to fight for it, and we couldn't. It was a real struggle, and so in the end, that record was us, but it was a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody had
years.
told me, if anybody had told me I wasn't going to get to play, or the four of us in my band weren't the ones playing on our record, we would just said Paxan, like, forget it. Like, there's not a chance that was ever going to happen. And I never had to ever consider the part of the fight that you're talking about. The fight for me just would have been my own personal pride and preference and belief in my bandmates, not all these other layers on top of it. But
well, and I will say this about your band in particular, because like, obviously, you know that I love your band. Like, that was like, not just because I'm dating one of the band members from the band, but you were an influential band, an influential band in for sure Western Canada. Like, there wasn't like as Sydney York, like, you were, the Weepool was always in the consciousness of the music, of the Western Canadian music scene, and the four of you would not have had the sound you had you not all four played on it. That's what made it special. Like, that's part of the magic, is that the parts that you played on guitar are the parts Glenn would play on guitar. Like, that's like, they were your parts and they were distinct to you, and they didn't sound like everything else. That's the beauty of a band.
Well, I mean,
like, that's the whole point.
First of all, that's incredibly gracious of you to say. So thank you, Brandi. I appreciate it. And I didn't, and I hope Rob didn't put you up to it either. So that's really nice.
Well, you know he didn't, because he didn't even want to say hi.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, but I mean, it's so true. There was a magic, and I would hope everybody else who is aspiring to play and coming up against these questions or thoughts, or maybe even someone's posing it to them, that the level of belief you just need to continue to have in yourself and the ones that you choose to make this with, and has to be higher than every other sound logic or or industry advice that you get at any conference or workshop or anything, your level of belief in yourself has to be bigger, right?
Absolutely. And because we talked about this isn't just a thing that female artists face. It's a thing that every artist will often face in their career. You have to be willing to invest that belief in yourself, because that is how you sustain being in this industry. If you don't believe in yourself and you don't have enough conviction in yourself to stand behind what you are doing musically, you won't generate any real artistic change in the industry. And that's I think a really important part about being in music is creating new things that haven't been heard before. I would prefer to create something that hasn't been heard before, as opposed to something that has been only heard, like exclusively heard. It just doesn't, it seems counterintuitive as an artist. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, because I also don't want to slag any of those artists that fit that pinhole. I think artists that are genuinely in that pinhole, that's really amazing, because you've kind of won the lottery, because who you are genuinely and authentically fits what they want.
Yeah. Well, because the pinhole has nothing to do with them. They didn't create the pinhole. You can't create a pinhole, right? Like very few artists through history have had the level of influence, and we're talking on maybe two hands, right? In all of pop music history, have had the level of influence to actually create the pinhole that the industry then wants to push everybody else through. But otherwise, it's somebody in the industry, the gatekeepers, the ones who determine the flow of money, are generally deciding what that looks like. Country is still so heavily dependent successfully on radio for airplay. They are pretty heavy gatekeepers on that pinhole. But I mean, I was going to ask you a question about, because in pop music this year, it was like almost, was it 100% female almost? Like the Grammys made a big deal about The Weeknd coming back. But besides that, it was so female. And it was wonderful. It still feels like country music far behind that. But rather than continue to dig into that stuff, you've spent a nice long time talking about stuff that isn't the most fun part of the job or the industry for you. So let's spin it around a bit, because I've talked about all the rug getting pulled out of you guys. You've had some pretty awesome things happen in the last little while. So can you tell me about some of them and where they rank for you? Like you guys seemed so incredibly pleased. You singing the national anthem at was it in Seattle at football? Seahawks?
So we actually did two pretty epic anthem performances last year. One was for the Seattle Seahawks Buffalo Bills game in October of last year, and the other one was singing the anthem at the MLB All-Star game last year,
which is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so how do you land that gig, Brandi? Like, how do you land that gig?
This is one of those things that, hilariously enough, I can thank for both of those, actually, an amazing Albertan Canadian, Keenan Vine, who does a ton of rodeo producing in Canada and south of the border, and he was asked to do the opening sequence for the MLB All-Star game. Being in Texas, they wanted something very like Western inspired, and so they were looking for country artists to sing the anthems, and Cody Johnson sang the American anthem for the All-Star game, and when it came to choosing the choice for the Canadian anthem, Keenan put our name and two other very incredible artists' names forward, and the MLB picked us, and so it was an incredibly big honor to have been chosen to do that, and it was also just a mind-blowingly humbling opportunity to do it. It was like that's definitely the most people I've ever played for or performed for in my life. And what was further was they told us before we went to do the anthem, they said to us very firmly, the Canadian anthem does not get televised. The American anthem gets televised, but the Canadian one does not. And we'd had some friends who had done the anthem, the Canadian anthem, at the MLB All-Star Game, and they confirmed that. So we went in thinking, we're performing to like 40,000 people in the stadium, which is also already huge, but that's it. Yeah. And then we sang the anthem, and then we got off the field, and our phones started going off with these people being like, "Oh my gosh, just saw you sing the anthem." And in my brain, I'm like, these people aren't all at this game. Like, what the heck? And it turns out that they did actually televise it, the MLB All-Star Game is like broadcast. There's like a 7 million viewership for the All-Star Game. So we had no idea that was happening. It was absolutely, it was a very unforgettable experience for us. It was amazing. Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, I think it's pretty cool you even knew some other people who had already had that experience. I don't know anybody else who's had that experience. So now I know someone who has been able to do that. Yeah. So I think that's super cool. If I ever have to call on somebody for some information. So tell me also about, so you've got this long history. I'm going to say it wrong, so I need you to correct me, whether it's with cadets or with Navy cadets, or what the specific designation is of your history with them.
So I have been a member of the Royal Canadian Navy since I was 18.
Yes.
So yeah, I never was a part of cadets. I went straight into like full Navy, but I still am actively serving. In fact, after we talk today, I will be going directly to the Navy to work for them. So.
That's so awesome. And so what do you do for them? You've been able to like do some pretty cool stuff lately, right?
Yeah, I'm very thankful for my military career. I am a musician in the Navy. So I play, I joined as a French horn player, but truth be told, they needed a vocalist. And at the time in the Navy Reserves, they were not allowed to hire vocalists. But I was a vocalist who also played French horn. So so I joined when I was 18 and going to university in Toronto, because I was like, well, I can play French horn and I'm a vocalist first. So I immediately joined there and have been working as a French horn player, bass player, and vocalist with them since then. But my role shifted during the pandemic a little bit. Because my experience in the military had been as a musician, and when the pandemic hit, my touring stopped in Nice Horse, and the military had all of these musicians that were supposed to go on tour as well, and they didn't know what they were going to do with them. Like they didn't have any idea what to do with these musicians. And so I reached out to the officer that is in charge of the music branch for the Naval Reserves. And I said, what are you doing with all of these people? And she said, I'm not entirely sure yet. We're still looking at options. And I said, well, if you need something for them, I would be happy to build an online music program for them to do in lieu of touring. Wow. And she said, can you do it in a week? And I said, yes.
Wow.
And this is one of those things where here we're talking about, earlier in this podcast, we're talking about being honest when you don't know something. This is one of those times when I'm like, I truly do not know if I can build this in a week. It's probably impossible, but I'm going to try it anyways. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to figure it out. And so we ended up building a program that was really the first of its kind for the Canadian Forces, where we had our musicians from all across the country participating in this online program, of training and really getting involved in doing social media videos, which was something that was fairly new for the Naval Music Branch, and building a production team from our very talented members. It's something I'm very proud of, and I was lucky enough to receive a commendation from from the commander of the Naval Reserve for my work with that. And I'm intensely proud of that for the reasons being, number one, it was something that I didn't know how to do. I had an idea of how I was going to execute it. But I wanted to make it happen, and I wanted to push myself in that way to try to make something that I hadn't created before. And I was also intensely proud because I feel like my civilian music career really helped me in that, because as a civilian musician who has been DIY for a large portion of my career, I'm so used to just being like, okay, this needs to be done. I don't know how to do it. I got to figure it out. Like that's just been the way. You see a barrier and you're just like, how do I blow through this? Because the barriers are there. They're always going to be there. And it's just like, how do I circumvent this barrier? Yeah. And so to me, it was a real challenge, and it's that spirit. It was kind of that spirit of what I do in my career, my civilian music career, that I brought to my military career, to be like, you know what? We're just gonna find a way to get this done. And I felt like I had nothing to lose. Like I probably pushed open some doors that I wasn't meant to push open. But I always kind of joke about it, where I'm like, the way I did things, I was probably like, if I would have stepped half a step to the left, maybe they would have court-martialed me for it. But instead, I was just a half step this way, and I received a commendation. Because I think great things don't happen if you don't take some big swings and take some chances. And that was what I was proud of, was that I took some really big swings, and I took some very big chances, and took some risks with my own career, and they paid off, and I was very proud of that. And they did something good they did something to advance the Canadian forces, which, I think that's important, especially, as a Canadian. I'm proud to, obviously my little naval tattoo right here. I'm very proud.
I love it. I think that's incredible, Brandi. Like, I know from experience that my participation in anything that came to do with building and developing, at this point in my life, is some of the stuff I'm happiest about, that I got to participate. The opportunity was there, and proud of the things that I got to do too. So I think that's incredible that you've had that opportunity, very unique opportunity that most people wouldn't know about or is even there, and you've been able to have an impact. Tell me about what's next, Nice Horse. So besides the fact that you did a cover of The Cars Drive, which I love, which is recent out this year, which is fantastic. I don't think I've heard it with banjo before, so there you go.
It sounds pretty great with banjo, right?
Yeah, I know. So you've been working on the duo version for a year now, and you came off finally getting that album out, and obviously some deep breaths and recalculations. I don't get the sense that you're choosing to slow down or stop or any of that. So what's the plan? What's the things looking forward to from Nice Horse at this point?
Yeah, I think that it's so funny. I don't think I could ever slow down in music. Like, I just don't think I could. Like,
I don't think so either.
Like, as long as I'm on this side of the dirt, I think I will be creating. That's something I've really realized in the last year of my life, is that is just what I want to be doing all the time. I just love it so much, and not even just in music. I've really been getting back into I do a lot of sewing, and now I've been sewing all of my own stage outfits, and I'm always craving finding opportunities to be creative. So there's absolutely no way I will be stopping in music, that's for sure. Nice Horse has, so the Cars cover that you're talking about, we actually recorded that as part of a TV show appearance that we made in January for a show called Wild Cards. And we were so lucky because not only were we physically in the episode, But we were also, they had, I believe, 4 of our own original songs that they licensed for the show, as well as having us record this version of the Cars, Drive by the Cars. And the producers and the showrunner really wanted that song. It was so important to them, and they were so happy with how it turned out, which really made us feel great, because it was their vision, and we wanted to realize having achieved their vision and also do a song that sounds like Nice Horse. So it was really a fun, exciting challenge, and that was my first time ever being in a TV show, which was kind of fun.
On set?
And yeah, on set was totally, it was totally, well, I shouldn't say this. Being on that wild card set was actually not a totally new experience for me, because 3 weeks prior to doing that filming, we were also doing filming for another TV show that doesn't release until December, that we are also in. And so that one also, and we signed an NDA, so I'm not allowed to say which show it is, but it's a show I'm very excited about. And
okay, no, I won't ask the wrong questions then. I won't ask the wrong. You got an NDA, but all I will ask is, did you get any lines in either of these programs?
Yes. So
does that mean you get to become
part
part of the SAG or whatever it is in Canada? Does that mean you're now part of the Actors Academy?
Yeah, apparently we are. They did have us sign all of that paperwork to become part of the...
I love that.
Yeah, so, and we do both have lines in the one that's coming in December, so, which was also very unexpected. I didn't think we were going to have lines, but it was it was an exciting new opportunity, and I'm definitely excited for that one to come out. And they licensed us, a song, like a song of ours that I really love is going to be on it. And there's just something really special about, it's the best thing about this career is that there are a lot of unglamorous things that we do, and a lot of work that goes into it, and so many, there's really these really high highs, and then these like totally like huge disappointments. But I sometimes have to remind myself, and sometimes other people remind me, like sometimes I'll get a note from somebody that I went to high school with that is like, oh my gosh, you're doing all of these cool things. And while sending me that, I'm advancing 4 shows and writing a grant that's due in 20 minutes. And I'm not feeling that lucky in that moment. But the truth is that it does make me think, and like, you know what, you're right. I've done some really cool things that I'm so proud of. And I can be really grateful for those, even in those times when, sometimes you're at the lowest and you're, mentally or emotionally in this career.
And the only thing that's preventing more of those incredible things happening is if you stop. Right?
Yes. And I think that's the tough part, is going. Yeah. And I'm not a great, that's for better or for worse. And this is probably something the military taught me. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's where I learned from. But I also come from a family of farmers, and I feel like farming is basically a half step away from being a musician. It's a lot of the same skill sets and mindsets go into being both. It's just, it sounds too presumptuous and almost high and mighty to say that this is a calling, what we do. But I just don't. I feel like music is just so wrapped up in the person that I am. Like it feels like such a huge part of my existence. And it feeds me in so many ways and drains me in others, but it's never the music that drains me. It's the industry that drains me, but the music never drains me. And I think that's I don't think like music can try to quit me, but I can't quit it.
Well, Brandi, this has been a blast. I absolutely love talking to you.
It really has been. Same.
You are maybe the hardest working person I know, And if I was sat down at a table and someone said, who's the hardest working musician you've known over the last 10 years? I don't know that I could name anybody else above you, Brandi. Like, besides the amount that you create, the amount of flights that you apparently take in your life on a regular basis to get to all these places and do these things. I mean, I remember reading the thing where you and Katie talked about you started walking dogs to pay for your trips to Nashville. In Nashville, you were walking Nashville dogs, and ended up having too many dogs to walk, probably to do the things you were in Nashville to do. Like, if that isn't a better picture of just this unending hustle. And I'm glad that you said that the music is the thing that sustains you, because it's just point blank to anybody who would want a life doing this. That there's a lot of different paths to what you end up calling a career.
Yeah. And
number two is that it's going to take a ridiculous amount of hustle and heartbreak probably to get there or to piece it together. But, you know, if you can tap into the thing that sustained you at the start or gave you the dream at the start, and I guess that's what I see when I look at you and when I hear you talk, and it's very refreshing and inspiring. I appreciate it. Like, personally, Brandi, like, I started doing this because I had to create something. I was dead and dry since the pandemic, and I knew that there was a certain version of things I wanted to do. This is the creative outlet for me. I get to do, the hour and some you and I spend together is the life-giving part, and then I have to spend 4x editing and all this stuff. But guess what? I fucking love it.
It's so funny because that's the part people are going to hear, the part that, that part that feeds you, which is also amazing because we get to show people the part that feeds us. And then you're going to go back behind the scenes and do all of the other things it takes to do the thing you're creating. And I mean, and I know because you are also, I'm not calling you a tool like I call myself, but you are also a multi-tool of the industry. And so
I was absolutely the jack of all trades in the business. Yes, you're not wrong to call me a tool. Yeah.
But I honestly, like, as we're sitting here talking, like, and you mentioned the dog walking. I honestly, if I roll it back, of everything I have done in my life, probably since I was the age of 12, I think almost every single thing I have done that's not music was for music. It was maybe like walking dogs. Look, I loved all those dogs, so I'm very happy to walk those dogs. but I got to that point because I'm like, walking these dogs helps me create more music. And I was a flight attendant for a number of years, and I mean, sorry, like I mean, I'm very sorry to the airline that I worked for, but I was working there because I'm like, if I work here, the schedule is flexible enough that I can do music. Like, it's like everything funneled towards this one singular passion that I have. And for better or for worse, sometimes maybe for worse, like I maybe I would be a different human being if I just wasn't so singularly focused on this thing that I love so much. But I do love it so much, and that's not really going to change.
Well, Brandi, you try to say for worse, but that smile on your face just makes it absolutely hollow. I can't believe it when you say it. So,
look, sometimes there's lots of tears, Glenn, but the guy that's in the basement has to deal with them. So
when he gets out of the basement, he can deal with it. Okay, well, I appreciate your time so much and your honesty and your energy. Like I said, you're a vibe. Glenn. Anytime I've ever seen you, and I always love some Brandi time. I wish you and Katie and Nice Horse, of course, all the best, and I can't wait to see, obviously, your TV show in December. But I just wanted to say thank you again for your time, and appreciate you so much and everything that you're doing. Yeah, so thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Hey, I'm Alexi. Stick around for post-fame with me and my dad.
Hi, good evening.
Oh, good evening. How are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you for asking. So this is so we're talking about Brandi Sidoryk of Nice Horse. and the episode, and I was so happy that she was a guest. And the moment I booked her as a guest, I was excited immediately because I'm just so used to her energy, and
Yeah.
it's very high energy, very often very positive as well. Seems like a glass half full person. So who doesn't love talking to somebody like that? And
For
she,
sure.
I thought she completely delivered. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was like, oh yeah, this is the best thing ever. And then I almost got lost in the conversation with her. And I think maybe I don't know. I'm still learning this stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
So this is episode 9 only of my life, and that doesn't always happen. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a pleasant treat, maybe for me. We'll see whether that's a pleasant treat for anybody else if I get lost in a conversation. But
I think it will be. I think
yeah,
I really enjoyed listening to this one. And I think even if you remove my bias of that I like listening to you talk, I think it was just a really interesting one to listen to. And she just seems so optimistic and positive. Like
yeah.
she just seems so lovely.
Yeah, when I say I got lost in the conversation, it's like I completely forgot that I'm not publishing video episodes of
Hmm.
the conversation, because I just referenced like a couple of times how even when she was spelling out something very difficult or challenging, she has a smile on her face.
Yeah.
But more than that, like what makes you know that it's not a painted smile is the vibe, right? The way a
And
person is
really,
communicating, that you know it's authentic, that
yeah.
she's, anyhow, just that whole thing.
It's
But
her
I
energy.
realized, yeah, and I just realized afterwards, I'm like, people, oh, maybe it's good. It's great that I let people know that she's like smiling all the way through this. Maybe that's actually a
Yeah.
positive. At the moment, I was thinking maybe that's not, maybe people are annoyed that I'm identifying things they don't get to see. But I'll post some clips of our conversation
For
as
sure.
usual. Yeah, I mean, I had a question for you specifically about it because I realized in the middle of the conversation when we were talking and got into at length, I feel, about the role that they feel or she has had to play as a woman in the music industry over a span of time now,
Hmm.
and seeing the changes, but also, as she gets greater opportunities, feeling this responsibility at times for what she does, she knows is going to impact how somebody looks at future women or women bands, if you want to call it. We kind of made a
I
joke
need you to
about that.
pause there because I feel like we were on the same brainwave because all of my notes are from that part of the conversation. And that
Okay,
is
good.
like word for word what I was going to bring up.
Okay, so jump in where you would jump in on all of
Well, what
that.
was your question? Because I
Well,
don't
the
want to
point I
answer
was
it.
sorry, yeah. So the point I was gonna make was I got caught in right in the middle of that of course, feeling a lot of empathy and wanting to find out more about that experience,
Hmm.
but also realizing that literally running adjacent to that was the fact that I was another guy in the industry making her talk about that more than just talking about herself and her music. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I
Like,
do.
again, I was all of a sudden super cognizant of the fact that am I making her be a spokesperson for the industry as a woman in an all woman band, quote unquote, and instead of just asking Brandy questions about her experience
Hmm.
as an artist, which is what I was in my heart doing and what I set out to do.
Hmm.
Um, Anyhow, do you understand? Like I just became so
No,
cognizant
you
of
don't want to be
I,
just
I
another dude asking her and making her represent all women, and I get that.
yeah.
Um,
So I
no, I
wanted to get
think
your perspective, obviously, as a listener of all of these podcasts so far, but also as a young woman hearing another woman talk about her experience and how you see all of that.
no, I I think that I mean I might be remembering incorrectly. It's been a few days since I listened, but like she kind of delved into it, which like I shouldn't say totally changes the fact, but it's not like you force some answer out of her. It's not like you set the stage so that she had to, but I think you asked insightful questions that like could amplify her voice on the situation. But I thought it was so interesting, and I'm so happy she talked about it the way she did, because she didn't speak on behalf of all women. Everything that she posed from like an individualistic point of view. Like, this was my experience and this is what I like felt or like needed to feel. And I think like just like as a woman, the way she phrased that conversation wasn't like I'm speaking for all women. It was like, as a woman, here's my experience, and I know other women experience it.
Yeah.
Which is so important. And I think it's just like the easiest way to amplify women's voices in that sense. But I wrote down that you had said to her during that conversation, when she was talking about, and it was specifically the example of like the green room, that it's such like a small thing, but that she like was cognitively aware about the fact that she felt the need to leave a green room space nicer than she found it.
Yeah.
So that there was no negative connotation on women and women in the industry and women bands for like the next people like down the path. And you had kind of like paused her and just said like, what a huge unfair burden for one to bear, to act so perfect so that the path behind them for other women is kept clean. And I think just the fact that she was able to pose that so nicely was just like, as a young woman, almost like refreshing to hear, because I've had countless conversations with other like women in my life in all walks about this, and having to like, just like the feeling of having to prove that you belong in the space that you do, whether it be musical, academic, like sport related, and just like women just always feel the need to like prove that they deserve the space that they're in a way that men never feel really. Yeah. And it's interesting because usually examples are so broad and so large, especially in like academia and like, you know, me with my lab, like it's just like big picture things. So it's really interesting for her to be able to articulate it with such like a small detail of leaving like a green room nicer. Because I'm like, it is exactly that. And I think it's like something that's really important for people, whether it be like women who haven't thought about it that way, or people who don't identify as women who might have not even thought about that before. I think that's just such a point that hits home and will for a lot of people who identify as women. And I think it's just such an interesting point for the podcast to come up about, because I've never even thought about it in that sense, like in a musical.
Well, I mean, a few things there. Like, one is I have this terrible, and maybe it's not terrible, sometimes it feels terrible, a quality where I think of the joke in a moment to add levity to a serious moment. I've done this in like boardrooms before, places I don't often control myself very well with making a joke. At the moment, I wanted to make a joke about it's her own fault for having a band called Nice Horse, that she feels like she has to be nice and clean up behind herself. Anyhow, it would have been a terrible joke, and I'm really glad I withheld. In the moment, the other thing that I was thinking in the moment was, I've had the exact same approach. Like, I've cleaned up rooms where we stayed. I mean, when we used to tour, there's a number of well-known venues across Canada that would have band rooms, because they were bars that regularly had live music, and there was an era where people were creating band rooms, so they would put the band up overnight. And we would always make a real point of leaving it as clean as, or cleaner as, when we came in. And green rooms the same way. Like, we tried to be a respectful band. We would, be very kind and generous with the sound people, who usually kind of get crapped on. All these aspects of being a professional. I remember working at those things. Well, that's exactly it. But what I'm saying is, the only thing in my mind was my own integrity, which was really important to me. And I would hope that every band would have that. But I had no experience once, or did it ever come to my mind, really, that I was doing this for somebody else.
Yeah.
that I needed, I should say, that I needed to do it for somebody else, that it was important, that it had value. It never had to be presented to me that way, because like our joke that nobody's ever called it an all male band. I wasn't sitting there thinking I need to carve a great path for the all male alt country bands behind me that come across Canada. Never. So
Yeah.
one of many relatable experiences I'm sure that women and those identifying have had to encounter, right? When they,
Yeah.
like you're saying, you've at your young age experienced it at the university and academia, and it crosses your mind. It never had to cross my mind. So
Yeah.
that's pretty significant. And I thought it was kind of funny joking though, when we were like, nobody's ever called it an all male band. Like they call it, they have to identify that this is an all female band. Like it's
Yeah.
still a novelty. Like it's still a novelty in 2025. Like it's
I know
not a
when you guys were
novelty.
like joking about that, I was kind of laughing along, and then I was like, had that moment I think that you guys also did, and I was like, wait, like it's kind of not a joke. Like
Yeah, that shouldn't. Yeah.
it's weird.
And the other thing I was trying to articulate, I'm going to say it at the risk that I still haven't articulated the way I want it to mean, and that's fine. And you're usually gracious if I make the mistake. But what I was trying to think of was the fact that the way I would like it to be in the world right now is like, I do want her opinion as a woman,
Yeah.
not on the problem going on for women. I want a balanced discourse in the world that in so many places doesn't feel balanced, right? I want to be able to offer my opinion and recognize that it comes from a certain demographic and perspective and, gender and socioeconomic biases. I get all that, but I still want to be able to offer my opinion to the world, or offer my ideas. And I want to be able to interact with others. And it almost feels like we've lost the ability to even say that, because it'll get torn apart and stripped down so quickly, that I want to just hear about Brandi's experience. And it's going to be from the female perspective, but I don't need to call that out. But that's just the way it is. But it keeps getting called out. And that's where I'm saying I loved everything she had to say, and then we had a really good conversation. It felt like friends, but I was still so cognizant of that. I still can't have it without feeling like I'm calling out that particular thing,
Yeah, but I
unfortunately.
think the fact that you're even able to think about it not only like in the moment, but like reflect on it, I think that's like the line that's like crossed and makes it so that you're not
Yeah.
pointing it out. Like I think the issue stems from when people like call it out and like throw a label on, like throw that woman label on something and leave it there. Like they're not cognizant of it.
Or just take the pieces they want out of context and apply it to some other larger story, which isn't fair either.
And I think you see that, like, I think the best example is like in women's sports. You'll never see a female athlete or team headline or break any news without the first word on that headline being like that they're a female team or they're a woman athlete. Like, I think it's like that, but you're not doing that. You're not being like, oh, look at this female singer, look at this like woman perspective. You're just also bringing up the fact that like her perspective comes from where it does and why that might be important.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think we're at a point in the music industry where there still are some traditional tensions of equality and such between the genders in the music business, but there is like it's also such a long ways from even the way I know it was talked about when I was young, and it's come so far. So you're right. Now we can look at sports, and we can look at the WNBA, and we can look at the PWHL, and we can see all of the kind of negative or difficult rhetoric around it, and challenging conversations, and those stupid old traditional viewpoints. But it has to start somewhere, right? And it started years ago with people just having the idea and nobody willing to sort of, be put in that box. And so those athletes are trying to break out of those boxes. And I guess I just hope that the conversations that are most important still keep happening, just to break down old ways of thinking, right? And and continue to move towards things. So all of that stuff aside, oh, I should finish that off by saying her and I did chat for a while after the podcast. And the nicest thing she said to me related to this, but also just in general for doing this podcast that someone could say to me was like, yes, there were a couple of really challenging things that aren't easy for me to talk about, but it felt really easy with you. So I don't think I could have gotten a better compliment from such a sweet person. I was very appreciative. She's done so many different things. So always.
Yeah. She's a really cool girl.
If you want to look to somebody for some hustle inspiration, she's kind of top shelf of anybody I've met right across the country. So, okay. I very quickly wanted to just ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot just really quick because I had a meeting with somebody recently regarding, some work I do to support the Edmonton Folk Music Festival.
Wow.
And, them like obviously starting the preparations for transitioning to making announcements. They've already announced their headliner here in Edmonton, Mount Joy on the Sunday night, finale night. So just in those preparation talks, I was reflecting on the fact that you are such a folkie now, in a sense, for our festival. Like you just love our festival so much.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like it's so exciting, and I get to bring you every year. And I have been doing that for a long time because I've been working with them for 10, 12, 13 years, I think.
A long time.
And so as a result, I've been able to bring you for a long time. And I was wondering if off the top of your head, you have a top 1 or 2 Folk Fest memories.
Oh.
And I don't know whether it's just a memory of being at the Folk Festival that you point out, or whether it's like a musical discovery or something that has kind of locked in as a favorite for you.
Oh, yes. Let me pull. Well, I'll say there's one that's like not
what are you pulling up? Do you have notes about that too?
No. No, you're asking for 2, you'll get 2. My first one though isn't like a distinct this is a one moment in time.
Okay.
But when I was little and going to Folk Fest, the first
a few years ago,
okay, no, stop. No, when I was little, when we were little.
Okay,
and we were
10 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. I remember loving it during the day, and you guys would buy the kernel corn. What's it called?
Kettle corn, the big bag of kettle corn. Yeah.
Yes, and we would get sometimes face painting and walk around. But I distinctly remember there were some of the late nights where you would want one of the late night shows, and Mom of course would agree. And I just remember sitting on the side stage and being half asleep, half not, and just leaning on you or Mom, and then just watching the live music and falling in love with it, and that just being a constant thing throughout the years, kind of growing up. And I was I think that's really where my very heavy fondness of live music really stems from.
Yeah, it's because you got kind of brainwashed because you were just falling asleep.
I think I got indoctrinated into this.
100%. Yeah.
But other than that, I was going to say last year's Folk Fest, I think was kind of the first year that was a little more and this is no diss to you and Mom, but was a little more independent.
There's no
I got to go with, well, because I loved going with you and Mom, but last year was the first year where I was I got to go with my boyfriend and my friend and meet up with people, and last year's lineup was just so. I got to see Wild Rivers live. I was pulling up my Folk Fest playlist from last year.
Oh, okay, cool.
But I got to see Wild Rivers live and loved them. And then there's a couple other people I got to see live that I loved, Black Pumas and Blue Rodeo's there again, etc. But Briscoe, the band Briscoe, I watched their set last year, and I remember sitting on the hill, and I was so tired, and I literally, every song they played, I was just I need this song, I need this song. They were all so good. And then they have one song called The Well, and that I think is the song that brought back my terrible habit of putting a song on repeat this summer.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Because that one, I kept playing it for you in the car, and I kept playing it everywhere. And then there was one playlist that I had made for work, and every time I was like serving a brunch shift, that playlist would get played, and it was on there, so I was hearing it every like work shift. Yeah, and that song was just like, I don't know, that like it still like hits a certain note in my brain, and I think it
Yeah.
also just like kind of launched like kind of a new music discovery for me this past summer.
Yeah, that's great, right?
Yeah, it was
Okay,
great.
so that's no diss on us in any way. Like, if anything, we've encouraged your independence all along, and
This
I
is
don't
true.
think anything makes me happier than to see you take ownership of that event for yourself and make it your own. So that might have been the most fun actual part of it for me was A, having you out of my hair, and B,
Oh,
just
thank you.
kidding. Just kidding. But I love seeing you do that. Like we talked about before at the day in Vegas when you and your brother were just running
Yeah,
back and forth from stage to stage because you wanted to see every act pretty much. And,
bro.
you know, music dad, how am I supposed to be more proud than you engaging with it that to that level? That's pretty awesome. The second
Yeah.
thing I was going to say is yeah, last year was pretty incredible. Was last year when Angie McMahon was on the lineup and I didn't even realize it and missed it?
Yes.
Because then I start
You were
watching
so
one of the
excited.
best comedies of the last 5 years, Shrinking,
Yes.
which we should have a whole conversation on that and posting on
Playlist.
its own because the music supervisor role is actually one of the main actors and the music choices are so perfect for an indie snob like me. They're so bang on. But the most impacting song of the last few seasons of that show
Yeah.
was at the end of an episode with this song Letting Go by Angie McMahon.
That's
And
on
then
my
I was
playlist.
and then I came to you and I was like, that sounds so familiar. I think she was at Folk Fest. And you're like, she was at Folk Fest last year, Dad. And I was like, so I can't believe I blew that one and didn't see that song get performed because it's incredible. I'm going to put it on our
Yeah.
playlist. It's so incredible. So that's kind of, yeah, last year had a lot of cool stuff.
So what we learned is going into this year, we're gonna
I need
fill our
more of,
time with
yeah, I need to do my research better
Yep.
and not just be fall into the trap of like, I've never heard that name before, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to
What
do
we
our
should do
research
is what I
better.
did last year. You look at all the people and then you make a playlist and you add like two or three of their songs to the playlist and you hit shuffle when you
You
feel
know,
like
people
discovering
you
new
don't
music.
know. Oh, okay.
Yeah, like what I did is I made a playlist and I like, but for most of the artists, like some I was like, I really don't think I'll be into you, and so I didn't add them. But for most artists, I just went on Spotify and like there's their top 10 songs.
Yeah.
And the ones that intrigued me the most, I'd add like two or three
Okay.
songs. And then I'd shuffle it. And then some artists I'd fall in love with, some I'd be like, I really am not into this. And I'd remove them. But the ones I was really into, I'd add more. And then I got really into those artists. And then the
Yeah.
fact that I would get to see them in like a month or two down the line was even
Yeah.
more exciting.
Okay. Well, well, maybe we'll make a shared one, which is code for you'll get to do all the work of adding them for me. But that might help me. That's going to be
Yes.
great. Okay. Thank you so much for your insights. I was looking forward to it. I appreciate
Always.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I'll see you in the morning.
See you in the morning. Love you.
Bye.
Bye.